asked two questions to address at this conference. The first was, what are the big questions facing NGOs? And second, what do you see the field of NGOs looking like due to social innovation in the next 10 years? So I'm going to make a few points, but I want to start with a couple of sort of like preparatory remarks, if you will. One, all this excitement that we have around social innovation, I think we all need to realize that my generation and your generation didn't discover social innovation by any means. And for all of you that want to know a little bit, I would urge you to read Jeff Morgan's, I think it was 2006 report, where you really talk about the history of social innovation, how it's led to so many progressive policies and movements in the past couple of centuries. Secondly, I'm obviously not going to be talking about NGOs as one big whole because there is so much diversity. I'm going to confine my remarks to the more formal entities, if you like, rather than general civil society. So what are the big questions that I see? There are four, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to go through them very quickly because I have this ticker here that's going by very fast. One is around the players. Two, relevance, the relevance of NGOs today. Three is around collaboration. And four is around impact, as you can imagine. The players, there is a huge distinction between, I think, the older, more established NGOs, and I would say from Turkey, a couple of decades old, and the more younger social entrepreneurs or social innovators, the grassroots organizations. Their experiences of social innovation is actually very, very different. The older ones have actually struggled with it, I think. The younger ones, they're not so stuck on defining it and framing it. They just want to get on with it and do the work. The second thing that I've seen is that the support for the younger organizations, there's a lot out there. You know, there's the incubators, there's the competition, there's Imagir and Zorlu and so on and so forth. And there isn't so much of that for the older organizations. You know, before we had, what enabled us to grow in Turkey, at least, was the EU funding, the foreign foundations, the UN. And as that has become less and less, due to us becoming a middle-income country, we've seen that this has actually also posed challenges for our growth and our learning. The second one is about relevance. The issues that many of us work in haven't really changed. I mean, I've been working for 25 years now. Education, gender, inequality are the issues I work in. Those issues haven't gone away by any means. They've changed, but they haven't gone away. But the way that we work in these issues has to change, and we've seen that because, you know, innovation isn't necessarily about solving a new problem, it's about solving a problem. And at least in one of the organizations that I represent, Achev, we've seen that you have to really spend an enormous amount of time remaining relevant to not only the issues that you're serving, but to your beneficiaries and user groups. Just because, you know, we're lucky, we were based on a randomized control trial, which is like the holy grail of impact, if you like. And even so, I think that we haven't been as concerned as we should be about looking back and seeing whether our programs are serving our beneficiaries. And I think a lot of the focus on NGOs around social innovation is more on the supply side rather than the demand side. Collaboration, where despite all this talk of partnerships and stakeholder engagement, we're actually a proprietary sector, and we have these wars between the young and the old and within ourselves and within the other sectors. And we really need a much more concerted effort on collaboration. And yes, of course, these kinds of gatherings are important, but it's actually what happens outside these gatherings that is more important in terms of collaboration on the ground in action. Oh my God, I've got 35 seconds. Right, I'm going to rush through what I see in the next 10 years. One, I see a lot more fragmentation, a lot more informal groupings, a lot more pilots and experimentation. Two, I see a lot more funding going into this area because of the philanthropists and the big businesses that come in. Three, I see a lot more dissent. I see a lot more disagreement because social innovation does, in fact, challenge a lot of vested interests. And we are going to see that. We're going to have to deal with it. I see a lot more challenges on impact. I'm over. Shall I stop?
Final sentence.
It's very nerve-wracking, this, having it in front of you. But let me finish on a couple of sentences around impact, because I think this is one of the biggest questions that we need to be discussing at this gathering, as well as others. Especially with regard to social innovation, I think we've sort of like been overly concerned with this ever-elusive systemic change approach. You know, systemic change is not necessarily everlasting. We've seen that in Turkey. We had massive gains in the civil sector at the beginning of this decade, and some of those gains, some of those changes have been eroded due to policy changes, due to societal changes. So just because you achieve social change doesn't mean that you're there and that's it. Sometimes smaller incremental changes may lead to bigger changes anyway. So I would urge people to not get so hung up on this, having this systemic change, but small tweaks in our understanding, defining of our problem can actually lead to, and I can give lots of examples maybe in the discussion afterwards about how we manage to do this in our organisation. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry I went over time.